as David said, I'm going to speak a little bit about how the environment relates to the discussions we've been having this morning and the presentations. And I have a couple of films I want to show as well that are short. So I'm hoping you'll be able to see those. But to start, let's see here. I want to start by posing a couple of questions to guide the discussion. And, excuse me. There's a lot of commotion behind me, so I'm going to wait a second. So the questions I want to pose for the talk are, in a world that is constrained by the problem of climate change, which I'm going to talk about more, how are we to understand the challenge of development? That is, for the billions of people on the planet who still live in poverty and are trying to move on a pathway to development. How does the threat of environmental destruction and climate change hinge upon their ability to develop? My second large question is the concept of leapfrogging. Is this a familiar concept to you all? Leapfrogging is a children's game in the US where people jump over each other. And the discussion and the debate right now is, will developing countries like China, Bangladesh, Ghana, will these developing countries leap over the fossil fuel dependent technologies that have been used in developed countries? Or will they develop in the same way that the United States and the EU developed, with coal, oil, petroleum, very fossil fuel dependent technologies? So this is another key question. And third, just the overarching question of the fragility of the planet and the level of environmental destruction already with us. How will that change our entire scenario of development, both in the rich countries and the poor countries? And the picture that you'll see with the 350 is the name of the campaign that I help run. And 350 stands for the safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the women in the picture are all from Bangladesh. And this photo was taken as part of a global demonstration in favor of government action on climate change in Copenhagen. And I show this picture because the question of development and environmental protection isn't just one that's happening in the rich world. It's being, in many cases, led by people in developing countries. So, starting by discussing the environmental challenges we face. This is a picture of conventional electricity generation from fossil fuels. This is a familiar picture, and the question I posed earlier, is this going to be the way that we see many other countries move out of poverty into development, or will they choose a different path? So I listed just a few selections of environmental challenges, climate change being, I think, foremost. Also challenges facing freshwater systems in the oceans. As we burn more fossil fuels, it doesn't just affect climate change, it affects the chemistry in the ocean. A third factor is around biodiversity. I've been told that Greece has some of the most plant biodiversity of any country in Europe, and biodiversity is diminishing over time. A lot of that is due to destruction in the rainforests. You don't have any rainforests in Greece, although you have a lot of rain, I'm noticing. But in the tropical rainforests particularly, the destruction of the forest leads to the destruction of indigenous populations, not only of plants and animals, but also human beings. And so I wanted to provide a couple of points now, switching to the topic of human development. And the 350 number I mentioned earlier, can you see the graph very well? Can you see the writing on it? It's very small. So the graph is basically showing this concept of how much space is left in the atmosphere for pollution. Because if we're going to stabilize the amount of pollution in the air at 350 parts per million, that leaves a very small amount of atmosphere left. And so this space in red is showing how much space is left for the developing countries and the developed countries to reduce their emissions. And as you can see, the years, we're talking about this decade and talking about reducing emissions immediately. And then in the next slide, I have a few statistics about human development that came from a book that I recommend for all of you, which is a great resource. It's called Plan B 3.0. And it's a book that basically goes over the current state of environment and development. And it's written by a US-based researcher named Lester Brown. And a couple of key concepts that he presents. First of all, the rate of income inequality, not just in the US, which we discussed, but all around the world. And the concept of, with 6 billion people in the total global population, the bottom billion, those who live with less than $1 of income each day, and the top billion, those who are much more wealthy. Brown also discusses the environmental stresses that I just spoke about, and the question of, is clean development truly possible? These are a few statistics about where we are right now in terms of poverty on a global scale. I'll just read them to you because it's small. In terms of nutrition, currently there are around 862 million people in the world who are undernourished, contrasted with 1.6 billion people who are overnourished or overweight. So that's a strange fact. In terms of health, around 1 billion people in the world lack access to clean and safe drinking water. That's linked to the nutrition. But as you can imagine, a lot of us take our drinking water for granted. It's there whenever we turn on the tap. For many people, that isn't true. And economic development is very linked to better health. So finding a better job, having more income is more difficult if you're ill, if you can't show up at work. This is sort of an obvious point, but it continues to be linked. And in terms of education, around 72 million people in the developing world are not currently enrolled in school. And for women, who this is a primary challenge with, each year of schooling raises a woman's earning power by 10 to 20%, which is striking. If women are able to enter the school, their local school, their ability to better raise income, their own education, and provide for their families and their communities increases. And I'm going to show a short film now about women and women's education and how that relates to literacy as well. So we're going to pause.